Welcome to Lumiant Live. I'm your host, Mark Akeroyd. Lumiant Live is the podcast for advice professionals that believe in a values-based advice experience, but still have that question, how does it all work? We connect listeners with other advice professionals to hear best practice client stories or business examples and lift the lid on how they made it happen. Now, on to today's episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Lumiant Live. A bit of a momentous one. This is our first one we've ever recorded live here in the Chicago office of Lumiant. So we've got a bit of a makeshift podcast studio, but we're really excited today because I'm joined by Graham Thomas. Graham, I usually go into a bio with all our podcast guests, but yours is long and extensive. So rather than me butcher that, do you want to maybe tell the audience a little bit about who you are, and then we'll get into why you're here and what we're doing today?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. Let's see. I started as an advisor at Solomon Smith Barney in New York City, 666 Fifth Avenue, 13th floor. So the writing was on the wall as to how that one was going to go. But I worked for a team that actually ended up dissolving, and I always wanted to move to California. So I had the opportunity then, moved to San Francisco, got into digital marketing, working for a trade publication that is now Think Advisor. I was there for 7 years, and that time moved back to Chicago. Then 8 years at Investment News, running sales in the Midwest. Then jumped to a 401k software company called Brightscope. Then worked at Advice IQ, which is now part of Discovery Data, so selling advisor data, and then fell into starting my own business, worked with a whole slew of different people as a sales consultant, mostly in the digital marketing space, but some startups too. And then have been working for wealthmanagement.com as the head of WMIQ, which is their research division, and also working with the Ritholtz Wealth Management guys on some of their podcasts, YouTubes, various marketing things. So it's just, we'll stop there.
A wild ride. A really diverse set of skills and a diverse background. And where you are right now is probably brings us to the crossover event that we're having here, which is today we're actually going to flip the script a little bit on myself. So I'm a little bit nervous, but effectively today what we're doing, our Lumiant Live audience, is 2022 was a massive year for Lumiant. We launched in the US. We nailed a couple sort of strategic partnerships, customers that we're really excited to be working with that are helping our product develop. And because of that, we've started to see some really good exposure and usage of Lumiant. And with that, we've had some really great insights. So we wanted to spend the time to kick off season 3 of Lumiant Live, sharing what those insights were from 2022. Insights around our customers and effectively who are your customers or clients, and what they were telling you about their well-being, their values, their goals, and then insights and observations from us on what great advisors or great advice firms were doing to implement a really strong human-centered, values-based advice practice experience. So we wanted to do that, and obviously, rather than hear me talk by myself for half an hour, which I can do, as you're all probably fundamentally aware, we've got Graham in here to sort of flip the script a little bit, put me in the hot seat, and ask me some questions about those client advisor learnings. So
right. And by the way, I did also work at RIA Biz for a long time, 6 years as a reporter part-time. So that's why there's like any modicum of credibility.
Yeah. So if anyone's watching the video recording and see me squirming in my chair, you know why.
Well, I learned from some of the best to put people on the spot.
So with that, Graham, I might hand over to you. I'll move into the guest seat in inverted commas.
You want to switch or no?
Yeah, we can physically switch.
Yeah.
No, don't do that. You'll ruin our little studio setup with our intricate design of cameras all around.
That's right. I'm gonna sit right here.
Don't move. Don't breathe.
So Mark, it's been really interesting. You gave me a demo of Lumiant a couple weeks back. Sent me some information, a lot of statistics. I think one of the things that I'm most curious about is the spark of Lumiant. Like, why was it created, and maybe why is it coming from Australia as opposed to homegrown in the United States? What's different in Australia that would cause this, you know, bolt of lightning?
Yeah, no worries. So, look, for the audience who've heard Santi Burridge, our founder, speak before, this will be a story not unknown to you, but it came out of his desire to want to do better for clients, right? And at the core of it, that's what we're looking to do. A values-based advice experience isn't anything new, and this is your point, right? In the US, this has been sort of talked about for a while. And we've seen some great firms implement this at scale before,
Yeah.
right? And it is a really truly human-centric way to do advice. The funny thing about the Australia-US shift, so as an Australian that now lives over here in the US and works on both sides of the fence, it's amazing to talk to advisors and business owners on both sides and how we look at each other over the fence. Because if I ask advice owners or advice practice owners in Australia, they say they look to the US for experience, insights, and how businesses are run. But interestingly, as I speak to US, they look to Australia for some of those client-centric views. And one of the things that I think helps answer your question is the regulatory environment and some of the pressures we've been through have really, I guess, fast-tracked our development in areas of human-centered or values-based or goal-centered advice, not necessarily from the scientific platform or that entrepreneurial platform that I do see here in the US, but more from the demonstrable advice production way. So let me explain that a little bit more. You might have heard in Australia we've been through a royal commission, which, for lack of a better term, was blood sport in a good way in the industry.
Expand on that a little
Yeah. I call it a blood sport because I just seem to remember at the time I was a regional executive for what the Americans would call a wirehouse. And you could watch this lawsuit on live TV. What a royal commission is when the government, for those of you that don't know, is when the government commissions a legal sort of inquiry into something, right? And the inquiry at this point was into the banking and superannuation sector, into mis-selling and mispractice, right? So what it effectively did for our industry is shine a light on all the things that weren't client-centered.
Yeah.
The long and the short.
We've had multiple versions of that.
Right. So, we know there's good and bad in all industries. But as a result of that, what it's forced us to do, and some would argue maybe overdone it, but that's a story for another time as well. What it's forced us to do is really demonstrate through our file, our experiences, our processes and practices, how our advice is in the best interest of the client. Now, in America, you call that being a true fiduciary. And while that terminology is sort of held back for certain types of advisors and certain types of practitioners, you can still sort of give advice without being a true fiduciary in Australia. Whereas in Australia, you can't give advice until you can prove that advice is in the best interest for the client. And there's all sorts of weird and wacky ways that we have to do that. So what advice firms have had to do in Australia and why Lumiant has sparked over there is it's given them a sort of platform, a scalable experience that is not only a great experience for the client because it truly takes into account what's most important to them, it does it in a way that's repeatable, measurable, and builds in that best interest obligation that is so important to our advice process back home.
So do you see potentially, obviously best interests is a very familiar term to a lot of the advisors in this space. Do you see maybe more opportunity coming from that, more best interest being required, more documentation? Obviously, unfortunately in this country, it tends to vacillate between who's in office, and we tend to, bounce around a little bit. So the consistency of regulation in that space, but, being measurable, being scalable, those are things we talk about as far as best interest goes. Is it almost a bet that that's going to be a growing area in our market?
Yeah, I think if you're a betting person, I think it's a fair bet, right? Because whilst you could argue how heavy that regulation needs to go, and smarter people than I will argue that, doing things in the best interest of a client is inarguable, right? The documentation of that and the evidence provided around how you've come to that sort of decision is where the arguments will lie. But whatever the arguments or the decisions get made on there, the companies that win will go, right, how do I best meet those legal obligations at one end of the spectrum? At the other end of the spectrum, how do I deliver an exceptional client experience for the target market that I'm going after, that I provide the most value for?
Right.
And in between those two ends of the spectrum, how do I build a process that helps me do that in the most efficient way, that isn't just reliant on me as the principal advisor, because I've got multiple other advisors here. I've got a support staff here. I might have a junior advisor in training, whatever that might be, so that everyone in my practice gets to play a role in the experience and stage that really memorable experience for the client, almost, something that feels like a theatre production to the client, right? Everyone's playing a role. I know exactly what's going on. I feel heard. I feel seen. And whilst I'm getting that exceptional client experience from the advisor perspective, everything's being ticked from a box perspective along the way. So that's from one end of the spectrum of providing that great client experience to the other end of the spectrum of documenting it. That span of documentation, that span of process can be quite big, which is where the scalable comes in, right? Because how do I do that over the amount of clients I need to make a really profitable business as well?
Yeah, and it feels like many firms are very good. They have advisors that have high EQ. Maybe, within a branch, there'd be, maybe 10% are really exceptional on that. But how do you train the other 90%? And how do you make it, again, to your words, a process?
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. The term that I like to lean back on, and this might have been a shift that would have been happening. Let me talk back home in Australia. This might have been a shift that might have been happening pre-Royal Commission. In fact, it most definitely was, where consumers are more informed.
Yeah.
It's inarguable. Consumers are more demanding because they've got more information.
Yep.
So therefore, consumer behaviour is changing.
Sure. Do you have the same issue that we do where advisors, is there price compression compared with also client expectations? Being like clients are expecting more, because that's where I see a really good opportunity for you. Because,
partially there's price compression, but one of the main drivers of that is our obligation to produce advice with the right documentation to demonstrate our best interest duties. So therefore, our cost to produce advice is higher and higher, and we pass that on to the client, right?
Right.
That's where the compression probably comes from most, less so the consumer.
Yeah.
So just to finish the point on the IQ v EQ, because that consumer expectation is changing, what we're seeing more is this shift from the advisors used to, in inverted commas, get away with being the smartest person or the most intelligent person in the room. Right? I've got all the answers. I know the best stocks.
Right.
Therefore, buy from me because you won't get anywhere.
Now, are you talking about Australia or the United States now?
Let's talk Australia. But from what I'm speaking, from who I'm speaking to here, parallels are very similar, right? Yeah. Which is great for me trying to work across both countries. Less to learn.
Right. It's convenient.
It's convenient. So they're switching from being the most intelligent person in the room to the most emotionally intelligent person in the room, right?
Yeah.
Because not only do you need to know that stuff, it's almost becoming table stakes. Consumers are going, well, obviously you wouldn't be an advisor if you didn't know that investment stuff. But what the role advisors need to play is the emotionally intelligent role. So what I mean by that is, what are you speaking about? To whom? So are you just speaking to the financial spouse in the room, or are you speaking to the non-financial spouse, as we would call it as well? Because everyone gets a voice.
Sure.
How do you know how far to push? How do you know what questions to ask? How do you know what space to leave in the conversation so that it's awkward enough to get the right response? How do you know when a client is putting on a facade because they're in the room of an advisor and they assume that the advisor expects them to know something, so they quickly read the New York Times or the Fin Review or the Wall Street Journal, so that they seem educated, but they're really not.
Yeah.
How do you know all that stuff so that you can play the power dynamic and play the room to get the most honest human in the room so that you can give them the most tailored and personalized advice. And to do that at scale, in particular, when you've got principals or practice managers that have been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years to the junior advisor that's just coming through is really difficult. So how we've thought about that at Lumiant is, well, how do you just provide the frameworks and around that process with some really simple questions that at least put it on the table for the client to give you some of those answers straight away.
So one of the things we talked about before we turned the cameras on was like, it's not about therapy. And so I think a lot of advisors might sort of think about this as, oh, I don't want to go too far. I don't want to be a therapist. And it's not that. It's really, and it seems like it's putting guardrails up for the conversation, even though there might be tactics that you have learned from other industries that are more EQ centric. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair. One of the traps we see advisors falling into in these conversations, and probably why some advisors lift the hood on a values-based experience, go, maybe not for me, right? Is that you've sort of got to be all in, right? You've got to be ready to be in that awkward, uncomfortable phase where you hear things. But the trap we find is that advisors love solving problems, right? And you'll hear some really interesting, complex problems in the couple, if it's a couple or even if it's an individual, as you ask these questions. And the trick is you might not be able to solve all those problems. And that's okay, because in the power shift here, you might have all the answers. But there is power in going, you need to find some of those answers elsewhere. I know someone or I don't know someone, whatever that might be, but at least they're out in the open. And at least we've got a reality to play with when we didn't have that reality when we started.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, financial plan is only as good as the input of the reality.
Right. And the honesty.
Yeah.
And the transparency. Sure. And, I can't help but not think a little bit about AI, ChatGPT, just because that's, the three letters of the day.
Yeah.
And asset management also, just because eventually you have to think AI is going to be better at asset management.
Yeah.
Than we are, right. And so that's just another sort of nail in the coffin of the individual doing their own investments, and pushing more toward that. But what we all know is that AI is not going to be emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
At least in the next couple of years. And so, is that another part that you see as solving and helping buttress, protect an advisor's practice, not just their client's practice?
Totally. I mean, if the advisor's doing the other stuff well, right? Because if they're not doing the EQ stuff well, then AI will come in and right, take over.
Right.
Adam Holt, shout out for Asset Map. I saw him speak at Shift recently, and he put this really well. AI won't replace the advisor's AI, right? The advisor's intelligence, if the advisor's intelligence is around the context of the client's life. Because let's take ChatGPT, you got to put in the input to get the output you need, right? And what we know through seeing the conversations, in particular through Lumiant, with a values-based conversation, is life is complex. We don't need to go through a Lumiant experience to know that, right? You just got to live.
Right.
Life is complex. That's a whole heap of inputs that you've got to put into a system before you get anything close to a contextual response.
Right.
Right. So how do they know that at 18 I was faced with this decision, then at 23 I was faced with this decision, and I observed my dad or my mum do these things with their money beforehand, and then after I got married, my values changed, and I now have to think about what my wife thinks about how I spend my money. Like, how do you put those inputs into that AI? Now, there might be a solution in the future, and that's okay, but it's not here now.
Right. So let's get into it a little bit as far as, the clients. You mentioned you had a great year in 2022. Welcome. And some of the things you shared with me was just, client levels up, households up, 7,386 current clients, 4,684 households, and 3,822 active clients. Those are big numbers. And I assume it's the kind of thing that, you're very much looking to improve on. But, how is that over the course? Is that since 21 or when exactly when was your
Yeah,
first client in the States?
Yeah, so that's since 21 towards the end of 2022. So, they are big numbers. I think humbly we would say they're humble
Yeah.
numbers, right? We have larger aspirations for that. That's a drop in the ocean in the amount of clients that can be helped live extraordinary lives.
Sure.
But we've got we know we've got another 40,000 just on the other side of the door of a couple of the big clients we told you we were working with now, Savant over here in the US, and we've just announced Invest Blue in Australia. So, we do this podcast in a year's time, and those two companies have launched, which they're about to this year. We have even more data, and it's probably less humbling.
Yeah.
Right,
Congratulations, by the
yeah,
way.
no, thank you.
Multiple investments from
Yeah,
all over
yeah,
the
yeah.
world, right?
Yeah.
So, and specifically within one of the modules that you guys have, it's called Your Life.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that and describe what that is?
Yeah, so for those that don't know Lumiant too well, and those that do, it's a little refresher. But our Your Life module is a questionnaire that we can send out, or advisors can send out prior to their discovery or prior to their progress meetings. And it's a real different take on the pre-meeting questionnaire, right? Traditionally, the pre-meeting questionnaire advisors would sort of send out as just be at a stretch, maybe what goals or what do you want to achieve? But then the majority of that is tell me how much you have, what are your investable assets, what have I got to play with effectively? Our Your Life questionnaire is rooted in one of our beliefs, which is to achieve total fulfillment as a client, you must have you must have an idea across how you're fulfilled across the 8 dimensions of well-being. So it's a theory out of the University of Michigan, so out of some research out of there. But it's to say to live a fulfilled life, you must have balance, or you must have progress towards these 8 dimensions of well-being. So we ask questions around those. One of them is financial, which is typically what we're as financial advisors used to talking about. But there's a whole ton of others, right? Well, there's 7. There's not a whole ton. There's 7. They're intellectual, emotional, spiritual, social. So what it does is just gives the client the opportunity to think about their life in totality before they come in and speak to their advisor.
Uh-huh. And yeah, I can see that being very valuable, because even as the advisor is getting to know a client, it's almost an interview to work with them. Like maybe it's a way for clients to avoid clients that they might not be the right fit for.
Totally.
And it's nice because it's different than whenever you go and interview with a new financial advisor. It almost feels like you're filling out a mortgage application.
Yeah.
There's nothing, it's just a bunch of busy work.
Yeah.
And so actually getting into something that has a much deeper level, I think is an engagement at again, a whole person.
Well, 100%. So the way I like to think about it is if it becomes, so say if it is in the prospect path, it gives your client a really quick view of who you are as an advisor, right? And here's the view I think it is. I care about you as a person, not just about your money. Right? The money is important, and no doubt we'll get to that. But to do that, or to know how that money best needs to serve you, I need to understand what it is that you need to work towards around these 8 dimensions. So it automatically gives the client a different view of, okay, I'm speaking to this guy or this girl, this advisor about different things. Because what we also know is clients have a preconceived view on what the advisor discussion's about. I mentioned earlier the facade that they might put on going, right, I need to speak to this person about my retirement fund or investments because that's what these guys do. So they come in solely thinking about that, and they're going to prep and anchor the conversation that way. But when you give them the opportunity to think laterally about their lives in a safe environment that's at home, and better yet, the survey goes to both spouses in a relationship. So not just the financial spouse fills it out, but the non-financial spouse, right? So both of them get a voice, and they fill it out in that comfort of their own home before it comes to the advisor, so that their voice is actually on the table before they get to the meeting. So gone are the days where the advisor has a preconceived view of, client comes in, they're 55, I know we're probably going to be talking about what do we do in the 10 years leading up to retirement, I've got an investment portfolio solution for that. It's, they've come in, they've got these things that they are concerned about around a couple of these dimensions of well-being, So fun fact, the top 2 areas that people are doing really well in, based on all our client stats, are social and environmental. So that's balance between work and life, and time spent on activities, and living in an environment that they're comfortable with. But the top 2 areas of improvement they're looking for are in spiritual. So that's living a life aligned to purpose, or volunteering in causes that are important to them, and intellectual. So supporting the passion project of themselves or loved ones, or education for themselves or loved ones. Just knowing those things, that conversation's completely changed in your first discovery meeting.
Sure. I mean, it makes perfect sense because, you know, there's a quote in a movie that once that's sometimes I do what I have to, most of the time I do what I have, you know, sometimes I do what I want to do, most of the time I do what I have to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's how we all, you know, as I have 2 kids, they're 7 and 9, I have my wife, I'm just trying to keep my head above water right now.
Totally.
But you can't forget that, because then you look up and suddenly your career is done, your kids are out of the house if you did a good job, and so it's you know, keeping an eye on what's, you know, present, near present, and future. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It just changes the conversation, right? To your point earlier, we're not saying you need to be a therapist. We're not saying you need to be a life coach.
Right.
What we are saying is, if you ask these questions, you might learn something about your client you don't necessarily know, and solutions might look a little bit different. In fact, they might look a whole lot different when you know these things.
Right. And you can't not think about retention as far as that goes. And I know you're probably not, you know, around long enough to have hard data around client retention, but we talk a lot about the client experience, you know, sometimes in a software, and I'm sure we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's often the client experience isn't necessarily thought about from an emotional standpoint.
No, absolutely. Just really simply, often the client experience is thought about, what is it that I need the client to do? Right? We flip that on its head and we go, well, the client experience should be, how do we want our client to feel? And in this instance, right, using the Your Life survey, we want them to feel heard, want them to feel like their voice is on the table. We want them to feel like both of them have a voice, right? Not just the financial spouse who typically dominates the financial advisor conversation, right? And you can create experiences around those things. Once you know that they want to feel heard, empowered, seen, then, right, how do I give them the space to do that? And that's through great conversations, great tools like our Your Life survey, shameless plug, but you can do those things. That's the difference in the client experience.
Right. That's great. So moving on a little bit, you know, as far as values, that's another, you know, we sort of touched on it, but diving in a little bit deeper. You know, I assume that the values are of particular value. Allow myself to introduce myself.
That's cool.
But the getting the spouses in both sides actually, you know, on the same page as far as, and maybe even understanding their spouse as well.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge, right? So the exercise we do, everyone chooses their own values, then it comes together, household values. There's a ton to unpack there, probably for a later time. Or tune into some other episodes. We've got some great ones there that talk about the conflict that arises there and the alignment that needs to happen. But once again, it gives both people a voice. What we know about values, and Bill Bacharach says this far better than I ever would, but values guide behavior, behavior drives results, right? Really simple. So at the end of the day, as advisors, the results we want to drive are the achievements of goals. And I mean, it'd be countless times advisors would set a plan, you come back for your annual review and you go, hey, we should have been doing this, but you haven't, right? Because outside of the advisor's office, life happens, right? They're making money decisions every day without you. And what we know is those behaviors are driven by their values. And their values around money, it might be values around their total life. And your job is to understand that, we believe.
Yeah.
So we give you the tools to help you understand that. And you know, we've learned some really great things about different value sets across different clients, and it's just intriguing to us that when you ask these questions, the stuff that you learn.
And the top 3 values overall: support and protect those I love. I mean, that seems obviously obvious.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
Right. And getting that out there, then feel confident in my finances, become more active and healthy. With I can see how support and protect those I love would be relatively, annuities, investments. There's a lot that we sort of handle there. Feel confident in my finances. Again, very similar, slightly different, but, anxiety, right? Something we all want to manage. But becoming more active and healthy. That's the one that sort of struck out. So what does an advisor do with that? Is that a checkup quarterly where you're like, you're on the Peloton?
It could be. Yeah, it could be. So the first thing, and this is a common question we get from advisors. Right?
Sure.
So the first thing we would say if an advisor asked me that question is, hang on to your hats, let the client define it first, right? Because we always want to go straight into solution mode, which is fine. We'll get
That's
there.
your job.
Yeah,
Right.
totally. You'll get there. No shame on that. That's fine. But let the client define that. So our system gives you the opportunity to do that. It prompts you to go, help me understand what's important to you about that, right? And what does that value mean to you? And what we learn is clients' definitions of that are completely wild, right? Because it's their own definition of it. It could be that I want to lose 5 pounds. It could be I want to be mentally healthy. It could be I want to diet more. I want to do keto, whatever that might be. Not something I've gone down the path of. It could be a whole bunch of things, right? And then the other thing we've learned is then you then get the choice as an advisor. Some of those are financial goals that you need to attribute money towards. So it might be a gym membership, right? If you're getting into cash flow planning, can I give them the permission that spending on the cash flow or spending on the gym membership, or to your point, buying a Peloton is a great investment of their money, right? As opposed to putting it away in their 401k or in their super back home, whatever that might be. So giving them that permission, because we know that permission is super valuable to clients.
Right? That makes sense, right? Yeah. Treat me like an adult.
Totally. But sometimes they're non-financial goals, which is where we see advisors spin out, right? Because, if it's not about attributing money to it, why do I need to give them support? One of our advisors that's on season 1 of the podcast put it really bluntly and said, that's okay, but you have a choice as an advisor. Do you want to be their coach, their guide that supports them around everything? Or do you want to be that person that just goes, these things you're on your own? And once again, we're not saying you solve it, but you can play a really simple role like an accountability partner. And by seeking permission to go, hey, if it is you just want to get on the Peloton once a month, hey, I probably want to chat to you once every 3. What about then if I just check in and go, hey, are you hitting the Peloton? What if it's as simple as that?
Right.
It's one extra call, or it might be the same call. You're just bringing up the right thing that's aligned to their values. It's a little game changer.
Yeah, and it is a differentiator as well, right?
Totally.
I think most people would agree that, the more nudges, the more incentives you have to stay healthy and, stay on track for, your New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
For instance, by the way, it's, we're recording this on, April 7th, so most of them,
Most of them are
gym's open.
Yeah. Most of them are bumped by now.
That's right. I also liked how you guys break these down in decades. And I'm not going to read through all of the values. Maybe you can superimpose that on this. There's a lot of interesting things in how there's a lot of similarities, but between the decades, obviously support and protect those I love seems to be very consistent. Yeah. Ironically, except at the oldest numbers. At that point, I guess you just, you're done with them.
Well, I think to go into the detail of the oldest one, I think that switches from support and protect those I love to number 3 on the 75-year-olds.
Avoid
being
a
a burden on my family.
Well, also spend without guilt, number one, though, which is great.
It's maybe a simple reframe in that stage of life.
Right. No, that's good. Also, feeling confident in my finances is that third one. But it is interesting to see how these sort of move as far as time goes on. Interesting to say you reframe it. Is that, a consistent thing that you see? I mean, is this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, I mean, we'll superimpose the data, but we see values cards. Values cards are just the prompt for the discussion. Right? A lot gets made of, I want to change the statement there. The trick actually isn't in the statement. It's in the prompt for the discussion and the discussion that goes afterwards. So people might pick these cards, but then turning it into what does that mean for you, which is why I use the sentence, it's a helpful reframe, is what actually gets you the gold.
So wait, sorry to cut you off there,
Yeah.
but I don't think we talked about this. Somebody, who's coming into this relatively new might not know. Are you actually talking about real cards, or is this a module on the software?
Yeah, so we've got both.
Okay.
The most common use case is on the software. The reason that is important is that it's all directly in the tech.
Right.
So one, you don't need to then take your notes, give it to your assistant to then put back in the tech.
Right.
Equally, a lot of digital meetings happen right now. Can't do a physical experience on that. Most of it happens in the tech. You do it on the screen. People click and drag and do that sort of stuff. So,
with the advisor or without the advisor?
So
is it a pre-meeting?
Yeah, so you can do it pre-meeting. So you can do the individual selection of your values pre-meeting, or you can do it the entire experience in the meeting. The reason, so if I go down the individual values path, we'll let you go to the point of selecting your individual values as both spouses in the household, in the comfort of your own house prior to the meeting, because you might need 5-10 minutes to do that. There's 16 statements. But we won't let you go by yourself into aligning those values or even unpacking those values. Because that's where we determine, to the point we were speaking about before, EQ being the skill of the advisor, that's where we would determine we've got to hold the experience until the advisor gets in the room. Because the advisor's strength there is asking the questions and asking enough of the right questions. Because if a client just did the screens, right, that say, why is that important to you? And that's it, right? They might give you a one-line surface level response. But great advisors know that it's question 2, 3, 4 that gets the actual response. So that's why we hold space for that.
And then the whole point of that and getting to these decades is to get to goals, right?
Yeah.
And which is that another module?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so values are largely intangible, our belief, right? They guide behaviour, but you can't really touch them, right? I can't feel confident in my finances.
Yeah, right.
But what we do is we get clients to go, how do you feel out of 10 that, let's keep using feel confident in my finances, you're tracking to that right now. And by getting them to quantify it in their mind, so they might say 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
And then following it up with one simple question, which is, what would we need to do to get that to an 8? You start to hear goals. Okay, for me.
Okay. So interesting. Other questions that might not seem associated are the actual answer, because you're almost
Correct.
prompting a former answer with the next question. Interesting.
Absolutely. So then you start to hear, okay, to do that tangibly, I would need to do this. Like, great. Well, why don't we list that as a goal? Because we know the most common goal in the industry, and once again, no shade, would probably be something like retire at age 65 with X amount of dollars per year until I pass away, and then pass that on, which is fine. That's a pretty common goal.
Yeah.
But let's go to the top 3 values we spoke about: support and protect those I love, feel confident in my finances, become more active and healthy. If you ask those questions that we've just spoken about, you hear really weird and magical and beautiful goals that are in the client's language, that are personable and mean something to them. To drop another stat, on average, we find 7.6 per household, which is a whole lot more than just retire at age 65, and gives you a whole lot more value as an advisor, but most importantly, gives a whole lot more clarity to the client about why and what am I actually doing here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because life's messy, life's complex, man.
And is it almost sometimes for the client to remember?
Totally. I mean, when was the last time you sat down and mapped out your top 5 values and then set goals assigned to them?
Never.
Right? And then visualize them in a platform that you can log back in on and go, oh, that's what I'm doing here. That was important to me that time.
Yeah.
I sort of forgot about that. I sort of said I'd spend money on a Peloton, not going to the pub and watching the game 5 times a week, which is cool too, right? If that's
Don't
part of
judge
it.
me. And to that end, like I think we're maybe delving into this, but what have you seen so far from your learnings from advisors who are currently using the platform?
Heaps. So we released a document late last year called the 10 Traits of Values-Based Advisors that we see. So there are some common things that we see that we can absolutely go through today. The first thing that we see is they uncover the why. I think that's pretty obvious. We've spoken about that.
Yeah.
Right. People that use us uncover the why. And what's important to that is they do that for the reason of they want to connect money to meaning. Right. Because to the point we spoke about before, values drive behavior, drive results. Right. So if I have the meaning behind what I need to do, I'll have more chance of creating the right behavior and therefore getting the results. So that's number one. Second one is they empower clients to tell their story. Just by virtue of the 3 exercises we've spoken about right now, you learn so much about clients and their story. And we know that every good story has a beginning, middle, and end. Hence, that's a story. And that's important in the advice use case, because when it comes to money, you need to know their money origins, right? What behaviors did they learn as a child?
Right.
So I still distinctly remember personally, my old man, bless him, used to have a jar in his room that all his $2.50 coins, so that's Australian language, $2.50 coins would go in, and then when that jar was full, I got it. And the reason they were $2.50 or $2.50 coins was because the pots of beer that I don't know if you guys have pots, the small beers that you can get on draft in America.
Pint?
Well, it's significantly smaller than a pint.
Oh, okay.
But he would get, from a $5 note, he would get $2.50 change back.
Got it.
So every beer he drank, he'd put it in. I mean, Akeroyd or Ray's, whoever he's now, probably does that for him. But so I saw that sort of inherited savings, and that's made a lasting impression on me, right? So that's my beginning. My now is I've just moved from Australia to the US, and I've got some stuff going on now. That's part of my story.
Yeah.
And my end or my future is where I want to go, right? You need to know all those things, because my past drives my behavior now, my now drives my reality, and my future drives what we need to change that reality to get there, right? So they sit in that. To do that, trait number 3 is they ask great questions. But not only ask great questions, they hold space to allow the answers.
Okay, now wait. This isn't specific to this list of questions, but this is something I've been thinking about since you've been talking. And it's almost like, is Lumiant, the why of Lumiant could be helping advisors ask the right questions, but isn't the problem that the advisors who aren't asking the right questions don't know that they aren't asking the right questions?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, potentially. I mean, you could really get into this and go, is it unconscious unconsciousness or conscious unconsciousness?
Right.
Right, because
I know I should be doing more, but I'm not.
Yeah, because here's the hard.
We all do that.
We all do that, right? But here's the hard truth and hard reality of it from a tech provider who wants more advisors to buy into their solution.
Right.
Is that you can get paid by your client without doing this.
Right.
You could run a really successful business without doing this. But if you're in it for helping your clients live a more fulfilled life, which we know a lot of advisors are,
Yeah.
then we'd argue maybe you're not doing that if you don't know this stuff.
Fair.
Right? So it goes back to what's most important to you. So
all right. So I cut you back, but holding the space, it almost feels like that is something that a solutions-focused advisor would not know to do.
Correct. And even people that want to do values-based advice, have to learn that skill, because everyone wants to solve the problem, right? But everyone knows that the first answer may not be the problem, only the surface level one. So, we hear some great questions, and we've heard them on previous podcast episodes. These great questions could be as simple as, why is that important? That gets you really surface level. We've heard a really great question, a really deep level question, that if you're still not getting below the surface level, and good advisors with great EQ know they're on surface level. We've heard questions like, what happened in your life or the life of someone you care about that's made you feel that way? That hits me in the feels.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
That makes you go, oh dear, okay, I don't know. But some of the questions are really simple, but have scientific meaning behind them. So we heard Dr. Jordan Hutchinson come on our podcast and go, one of his great questions is, tell me something good, because it gets clients in a really good flow state of mind.
Right.
And when they're in a good flow state of mind, they're more likely to open up.
Yeah. So sharing good stuff is easier, but then that opens them up to sharing more difficult stuff.
100%. 100%.
Open the floodgates.
Open the floodgates. So the next trait is they allow clients to choose their experience.
Yeah.
Now that's not a choose your own adventure type book. I mean, part of it is that. Advisors might panic when I say this, because they're like, oh no, I need a process. Yes, you need a process, but clients choosing their experience is more, for us, what we see is advisors relinquishing that power to allow clients to participate more.
Yeah.
So clients choosing how much to divulge, how much to give, so that they can play the role that they want to play in this relationship.
Right.
You've got to give them that opportunity, which is what we mean by choosing their experience.
Yeah.
And to that end, the next trait is great advisors that do this master the balance of power.
Yeah.
Huge.
So bringing both sides of the equation in, making sure it's not too balanced. The whole 90% of widows leave the advisor because he never spoke to her.
So correct. There's two aspects to this. There's the balance of power between the financial spouse, who's usually the dominant person in the conversation, and their non-financial spouse, right? Because you've got to acknowledge when they're cutting the other one off, or the other one's silent because they don't feel like they've got something to contribute. When they do, right? They clearly do. It's their money too. It's their life too.
Yeah.
But the other aspect of power is knowing when to relinquish my own as the advisor.
Right.
Right? To go, all right, I want this meeting to end in an hour, but I've got these people crying or fighting about their values. I've got to hang on for the ride here.
Yeah.
I've got to sit down, shut up, and go, okay, let's talk about it.
Right.
Right?
So important. Again, another example of EQ.
100%. 100%. So then that's all well and good. And typically by this point, advisors are going, yeah, that's sweet, but when do I get to do the stuff that I'm a specialist at?
Right.
So great advisors that do this, that we've observed, can link the planning outcomes to these conversations.
Sure.
So you told me X was important to you, or you told me Y was important to you. This is why we're going to do this.
Right.
Right? So the fancy term, I think Brendan Fraser says this best. It's linking planning to purpose.
Sure. And the other thing is, in the end, does the client care about, your glide path, or, whether we're using a 60-40 or whether it's, an American fund versus BlackRock? Like, they don't care. They're just like,
if clients knew more about modern portfolio theory, sure.
that's not what we live in.
Is it going to happen? I don't know. So then the last few traits we sort of see are more from that practice management side. So we talk about a good process delivers great results. So we speak a lot about an experience, and I've already spoken about. It's about asking at every step of the way how a client needs to feel, right? So then going, okay, to deliver that, what's the process that underpins it? What's the systems and tech that I need? And then how do I do that rinse and repeat?
Right.
Everyone knows their role to play, and they do it. And when you do that, in particular, when you implement a new technology, say Lumiant.
Yep.
Once again, another shameless plug.
Yep.
Great, great values-based advisors
Asking the business.
know that to do this and implement this, they can't underestimate change.
Right.
And that's change for their clients because remember, clients might be just assuming that they're here for investments, and now you're blowing up their life and going, we got a lot of stuff to do because yes, life's complex and messy, and we do have a lot of stuff to do. But it's not just them; it's their staff as well.
Right.
We've been doing stuff like this for a long way.
Right.
We're gonna get comfortable being uncomfortable. We're gonna go down this process, and we're gonna ride it out. Right?
Yeah.
And look for great tech that has support to do that for you.
Support. Interesting. I would assume that there's quite a bit of that within
100%.
the platform.
Yeah, it has to be. Within the platform, we've got an academy we're just about to launch that helps walk you through all our best practices for that. Our customer success team is built around that. Right?
Yeah.
So I get the joy of leading our customer success team. They're great. Shout out to them. But one of the things that they do is they help you map your ideal experience because we know that getting you to implement Lumiant isn't just about knowing the clicks in the portal. In fact, the clicks are largely the easiest bit. It's knowing how do you pre-position, position, and post-position each interaction. So pre-position might be an email, might be a phone call, might be just the start of the meeting. Position might be once you're in it, what are the things you're actually saying whilst you're doing the clicking?
Yep.
And post-position is what do you need to recap for the client for all of this, or recap for your staff even, so that everything that you've done is actually meaningful and worth it. So, I mean, all that sounds really sort of tricky, right? And could be really intimidating. But what we've observed of the advisors that have implemented this, they need to know their why too, right? And that comes up in our last two traits.
Yeah.
So what they do is, the next trait is see the bigger picture.
Uh-huh.
And that bigger picture might be for their client, their own life, so their own purpose, or the industry, right? So we've even observed and heard people wanting to do this because they know that it's a different proposition that attracts new talent to the industry and helps retain younger talent and bring them through the industry, right?
Right. So it's self-serving both from a personal and business standpoint, while additionally doing it for the client.
Do good by doing good.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Check all the boxes.
Check all that. And then lastly is they know that that's their belief and they stick to it.
Right.
Because you need to be unwavering on this. Because it is weird and different.
Right.
Right? And either you're going to get challenged by it, a peer at a competing firm or a different firm will challenge you and go, why the hell are you doing that? Right? Or your clients might turn up to that first meeting and go, hey, that survey was whack. Right? Why are you, right?
Right. It's just a new job.
It's a new job. But the great advisors go, I know why I'm doing it and here's why we're doing it together. And they can articulate it perfectly and beautifully.
Well, and anything you practice, right? 10,000 hours to become an expert in
100%.
anything. It's
100%.
just a new sport or a
Correct.
new instrument.
Yeah, so we share these, and the reason we got you in here today, Graham, to quiz me on it is we share these just to create awareness of it.
Sure.
Right? Because everyone's got clients that are the same clients. They're all people at the end of the day. People have values, right? People need help. And advisors are constantly looking for best practice. We might not have it, but we have observed great traits. Right? And we wanted to share those great traits with people so that you could go, hey, I'm thinking about this. I think I need to sort of be more resolute in that trait. Or, you know what, I could ask better questions, whatever it might be.
Or it's that they want to do it and they need help to do it and they need the process, the framework. And
Absolutely.
It's not going to come from a seminar.
No, absolutely not. It's going to come from rethinking your proposition, rethinking how you want to do advice, getting that to align to your client experience, your process, and the tech and support and systems that go underneath that, and just giving it a go and doing it really well.
Fascinating stuff, man. I think, we're hearing so much more about this in the industry. So, congratulations. Thanks for bringing it over.
No worries, man. Thank you for interviewing me.
Quite literally.
That's okay. I really appreciated your time, Graham, and hope everyone got a bit of value out of that.
My pleasure, Mark.
Thanks, man.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Lumiant Live. If you really enjoyed it, we'd love if you could hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast provider so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming episodes. Thanks again for tuning in.